Welcome to today's webinar on the rise of the entrepreneur and the opportunity to listen to some invited guests and Werner Biegler. I'm not going to give you a lot more color. I'll let Werner introduce himself and then I'll interview him and we'll move on to additional questions and comments that you all will be invited to share. Use your chat button, mute during Werner's invitation or interview if you will. So Werner, welcome. Before we start, why don't you give the audience a little bit of color if they don't know who you are as to why it is you think I've invited you today.
Sure. Well, thank you, Perry, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. So my name is Werner Biegler. I'm a lifelong tech person. My history goes back. I won't give you a long story. I'll give you a thumbnail story because I don't believe in long stories. I believe in thumbnail stories. So my story is I was hired into a little tech company called Nortel Networks back when I was 24. Spent 7 years in corporate finance, and then found my way through Nortel learning about the global marketplace and how to serve global customers at a very young age in the finance area, which is if you're wanting to create a startup, having a finance background next to a software development background is a great background to start. So I spent several years in Nortel, went through finance, corporate technical support, did a stint in enterprise sales. That was very valuable. And then got hired to run a couple companies. And then, long story short, 7 years ago, founded a company called Verify. And Verify was an education technology company. Our mission was very simple, and that is to help students learn the STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and math. And we stayed very focused on that one mission, solve some hard problems with a very small team that billion-dollar publishers in North America could not solve. And we gained the recognition of a few companies. We landed some very large customers, and one decided to go ahead and make us an offer we couldn't refuse. And we were bought by a company called Chegg, which is the largest direct-to-student learning platform in the world. Market cap around $10 billion, revenue $600 to $700 million a year, and growing rapidly. And so my team and I are now part of that, and we are leading some key projects for Chegg.
How would you spell that, Werner? How would you spell Chegg?
C-H-E-G-G.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. The acquisition was not made public for various reasons, nor the deal terms, but all my employees were stock option holders, a young team of millennials. They all did well, depending on their length in the company, and the shareholders exited very gracefully. So basically, it was a sprint of 6.5 years that came to conclusion in February of this year. So made the decision to join a bigger company, pursue the mission with a lot more power and a lot more funding, and that's what we're doing now. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Werner, we're getting an increasing number of successes in Canada. Some of them exit and end up in other jurisdictions. Some of them stay. In your overview, I could tease out a few of what you view as keys to success, but could you highlight what you think are, as you tell your wife and your kids in the future, what were the keys? What is it that made this work? And did it work?
Sure.
Is exiting working? Is making a whole bunch of money working? What are even your keys to evaluate success?
So let me just go through kind of a handful of keys, and just be careful that what worked for me, what worked for us, may not work for another company in a different space. Verify was in the education learning space. Our customer base was not teachers or students, but our customer base was going after large content providers, so very large enterprises. So that's a distinction. What worked for us, I think, summarized up, is basically three things. Distilling out your mission, what problem you want to solve, staying focused, and I'll go through these in a sec, and really being frugal. I think those are the three that were foundational focuses and missions that we follow. So first off, mission. So our mission statement was to help students learn STEM. So everything we did in Verify over 6.5 years, any new idea, any new hire, any new marketplace was always around helping students learn STEM. And the reason I say that is I'm now an investor in some companies and seeing a lot of startups. And it's funny how a startup gets success in one area, one little market. After 3 years, they're starting to accrue some revenue, $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month of monthly revenue, and then they decide to all of a sudden expand into 4 different markets. And we want to do fintech, we want to do two-sided marketplace, and all those take money, effort, and their new market and dollars, and they take away from the focus. Verify, our mission was to help students learn STEM, and we stayed very, very focused on that. And I'm a person who's prone to looking at other things, but it really helped us stay focused. And that really means that every dollar you invest is a dollar in that focus and that mission, and that's very important. And staying focused, we stayed very focused on solving the problem that we were trying to solve in delivering online learning for STEM. And then lastly, which is probably depending on how you place it, either 1, 2, or 3, but you need to be frugal. Doing a startup, you need to focus on your dollars, you need to focus on your pennies. Every investment we did was timed with incoming revenue, was timed with the funding, was timed with the grants. I tried to keep balance with investments and funding always the same, never get too far, never ever spend more than what we could actually see coming in, because that's the death of a startup. So just being really, really frugal, and even when we raised money and had grants coming in, always making sure we got the most out of every penny and dollar. Never buying too much office space, having room for, minimal room for the team at that time, growing when you could, but always stay measured, always keep within your bounds. I think that's a thing. And the reason I mentioned that too is that I'm investing in startups, and I'm seeing some startups recently raised a lot of money, and yet I look at them and I'm going, wow, they're spending, they raised $2 million and they're spending $30K a month, and the revenue is a fraction of that. And that to me is a bellwether for just bad news. So you really need to stay focused on your finances and be frugal, right? Be absolutely frugal.
Those are keys, Werner, to how to grow a company and how to survive.
Mm-hmm.
But from what you've told me, Chegg didn't just buy a product, they bought a company. And with that company, they got more than just the product.
Right.
That meant there was something about the character or the characteristics of the company itself that they were seeking. Since I was party to the exercise, I can weigh in here, but I'll let you go first. What is it that they saw that besides product that made the company appealing?
So a couple of other things that I didn't speak about, but a byproduct of all that is really, so when we started Verify, people would ask me, so when are you going to solve Verify? Are you going to solve Verify? And I said, very focused. We want to build a great product, have a great team, and create a great culture. And what Chegg saw in us was basically, a culture that I had infused with my team of millennials to be very, very responsive. Our ability to turn product around, to build new features, to respond to customers, I think was highly, highly respected. I led and educated and worked with the team of millennials that okay, when a customer calls, we get back to them within a day. We respond rapidly, and if we have to do something, we do it quickly. Anybody could try to replicate a feature set over time, replicate a service, but it's absolutely impossible to replicate a culture of speed. And that's something that we built that I think was highly enamored. And we built a great product. The product is a reflection of our focus in ed tech. We built a super great product that took at least when we got started, 3 to 5 years how to build it very deeply. And that was respected. And that's because we're focused. We're focused on building an online application for learning STEM. We didn't do BCD. We stayed very focused on that. So I think, Perry, to your point, that it was a culture of of being very, very responsive, being very focused, and building a product that served a need that was hard to do.
It served a need that was hard to do. How did you assess what that need is? I mean, engineers can build all sorts of things that can take us to the moon, but that doesn't mean we necessarily are appealing to the market. And I sense that Chegg, as a publicly traded company, wants to make money and wants to grow revenue. How is it that you were able to ensure that what you were building was in fact marketable?
So like I said, when we started off with Verify, the problem we wanted to solve was help students learn STEM. And so a layer down from there was we discovered how you learn STEM is through practice. You want to be able to practice questions. And so we looked at STEM and said, okay, a STEM question has two things. There's always a math equation, and there more than likely is an image. There's some dimensionable image that reflects the values in the question. And so we sat back and go, well, if you want to learn STEM, it's all about practice. So how do you create a wide library of practice questions that you can send to students that they can practice with? So what we invented, or what we developed, was basically a tool that anybody can create a question and a solution. And in that question, you have a question that you can also attach a scalable image. We invented this piece of CAD software. So very simply, if you say, what is the area of the below image? And the image has a height of 10 and a base of 10. And you do the math for that, and you put in the solution, the math for that. A student gets that, and they see the question, what is the area of the below image? And it has a height of 10 and a base of 10, and the area is obviously 100. What our software did was we created a set of algorithms that take that one question and can randomize the height and the base. The height could be 20 and the base could be 5. And the image would update dimensionally. The scales would update to reflect 20 and 5 perfectly. No heuristics, it would be updated. So that image would be fresh. The student would get a fresh image that was correct. It wasn't the same old image with new dimensions, but incorrect, physical layout. It was an updated image. So then if you imagine that, if you step back and go, well, I've got a class of 100 engineers, I want to send every engineer 10 questions. With Verify, they would basically get 1,000 unique versions being sent to the student. It wouldn't be the same question sent to every student, it'd be a unique version. So that's what we created, this powerful platform that takes a question, you can have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of versions of it, and send that to a student. When the student gets it, they can try to solve the problem. If they get it wrong, they could say, oh, send me a new problem. It sends them a new version of that problem. They try to solve it, and if they get it right, it's assessed right there and they score it correctly. But they can practice with that. And that's a very simple example. But if you start looking at engineering questions or physics questions and being able to send the student questions and reiterate them, that's a very, very powerful premise in learning STEM. Because when you learn STEM, as you know, it's like music. It's about practice, practice, practice.
So clarity of mission, which was defining the problem, making sure
Yes.
your market was the focus, and being frugal along the way. That did take a team. This is not something you did on your own.
No.
And so you needed to mobilize and manage others. Tell us a little bit about how you approached the building of your team that ultimately have each done very well.
Sure. So the team, as any good startup is composed of, you have to have a person that brings strong management, business experience, finance experience. I brought that. My other team member brought the technical prowess, right, which you need. You need somebody who's a developer, a great CTO. He brought that technical ability to make software, to train people, to onboard new developers. That's, and then the third piece we wanted to get was obviously somebody who could help us sell to big US customers. And so early on, discovered on the internet, a consultant that I hired, a multi-year relationship, who was an ex-president of a large US publisher, knew the market really well, and we can get in to see large customers quickly without having to cold call up the ranks. So that was something else I discovered.
How did you find him?
Oh, interesting, Perry. I literally found him on the internet. I knew. I'll back up for a step. When you're a startup founder and CEO, one of the more important things I've learned was knowing what you don't know and admitting what you don't know. And I knew when we got into the space, I could try to hire salespeople and and they would go after the customers. But I knew very well that these are large customers. There's in the North America, there's probably no more than 30 or 40 of them. And you need people who know the marketplace. And so with that in mind, I started to literally search the internet and by accident found this person as a consultant to textbook authors. And it turned out after several after several calls, wasn't even Zoom back then, it was just phone calls, found out he was an ex-publishing executive, knew the market very well, could get us into a demo in 1 or 2 calls, and that was a great success in our company. So in the early days, getting going, absolutely. So
Why the US? I mean, some say that you shouldn't begin to export and consider going foreign until you've established your presence within your current and local market, but
yeah.
you have leapfrogged into
Well,
a global market.
well, like I said, I think there's 2 parts to it. So back when I got started with Nortel, when I was 24, joined a young company. I joined a company that was making fiber optic cable in Saskatoon. Guess what? All our customers were in the US, some in Canada, some global, right? So very from a young age, you learn the marketplace isn't local, the marketplace is global. So when we started Verify, knew full well the problem we were solving. At that time, there was 1 or 2 publishers in Canada, but the bulk of them were in the US. So go where your customers are, very simple. Yeah.
Was COVID an issue during these? Was COVID actually good fortune? Did the arrival of COVID and the rise of the market for online learning assist you, or was it irrelevant?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you know what happened during COVID, the online learning. If you look at any online learning company in Czech, especially, their fortunes went up 2 or 3-fold. So that paid dividends for us in our product pre-acquisition, and I like to think it was probably it's obviously I don't know, but it was obviously a factor, I'm guessing, in the acquisition of us to help them accelerate their marketplace success.
Most entrepreneurs would not attribute an element of luck to their success, but I don't think we can overlook the fact that while you may well have ultimately arrived at the same destination, COVID does seem to have expedited the sale and your success. So
yeah.
I'm not going to say there's good news or silver lining in COVID, but you did in fact benefit. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and
Sure.
come back to Alberta itself and the extent to which you were working alone in isolation, or whether or not we have an innovation ecosystem in Alberta that was critical to your success. Do you want to comment at all about the availability of money, marketing, management, manpower, Moxie mergers and marriages to enable you to succeed?
Wow, big question. So let me deal with the money part. We only raised, so we were a bootstrap company. One thing I missed in my thumbnail, we were bootstrap. We only did 1 fundraise, 2015, raised on the order of probably 300K, largely from local investors, all successful business people. Were contributors for that round, and that was largely getting out with 1 or 2 key people, then bringing on 1 or 2 key people, and then over a period of 6 weeks, boom, things were done that way. We did not approach, back then there was probably there could have been there could have been an angel in the city. Maybe 1 or 2 wasn't aware of. I just went to my network, went to the networks of some key people, and we found people that they loved the mission. They wanted to be part of the mission and the story, and they understood the problem that we're trying to solve. The ecosystem, Perry, did not really. At that time, it was still in its infancy. I did not reach out to that. I knew what we needed to do, and I'm not a social butterfly. I know what we need to do, and we get it done. And you just got to focus on the mission. And there weren't any similar companies. There wasn't any resource pools. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a founder now, if I look at the vast amount of digital resources, podcasts in the space, there's probably 100 times of the information available now than it was 7 years ago when we got going. So there really wasn't that many data points. There weren't people around, as there are now, weren't people around who've been there or done that. And you want to be careful to avoid people that have been there and done that, who tell you their story and profess that's the only way to go forward. That's the wrong thing you want to do. So it was the hard work of the team, and we just pushed forward. But there was no, we did not leverage any local network other than get involved with the grants. We were very successful in writing grants. We were 7 for 7 in grants. We won some big grants. Got the support of IRAP when we needed it, and they were a great partner. But there wasn't much leveraging of local ecosystem.
It's conceivable that just the concept of a system, which would imply there's something out there that we can all touch, and if it's mature, it'll work for everyone. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a bit of an illusion. It seems to me what you did is all the pieces are out there, but they don't comprise a system until someone goes out there and touches the various elements to create what you needed, which was unique to your situation. The systems don't always meet the needs of an individual, and are sometimes an illusion to an academic that we have the pieces, and whether they function as a system or not gets tested each time someone goes out there. And the requirements are so unique under so many different circumstances that you're asking for the impossibility for it to function like a system. It's up to people like you to go out there and almost make that system work for you.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. The one thing you gotta be careful of is you want to avoid drive-by help, right? Because when you start in a startup, you can drown in the sea of people who are going to give you drive-by help. This is what I did, no application to your business, and Perry, you were the chairman of Verify for 3.5 years. I reached out to you because I knew what I didn't know, and I wanted somebody who can give me a wider perspective of a couple things, be a sounding board to me. And once you're invested and once you're part of something, that's when you look at your advice to the founder and you shape it and you make sure it's tangible advice, as opposed to being a side-by observer and contributing, right? So you need people. The people that matter to a startup are people that are advisors, shareholders. A lot of times when I had to make an important decision, I reached out to 2 or 3 of my shareholders who are great because they're in it, their money's in it, their advice is going to be tied to the fact they want to help you. And so they make sure their advice is tangible and directed. And that's the best thing. I use them. I had a set of 3 advisors and my board. And those are the people that really matter in the end. The ecosystem, I think, is there when you're early and you're very early, you're trying to figure out things, you need help getting started. But once you're past the startup and you're up and running, and we were cash flow positive within 4 years, which is kind of unique. We were cash flow positive then. So we were a going concern. We were no longer sort of a startup. We were a growing business. And so, but I'm kind of old fashioned, my people who advise me, you better understand my business. You better know who I am. You better understand the marketplace. So that's.
One of the questions that I think always comes out is not just the features of the organization and how it responded to change and whether it was able to pivot or not, but it's the actual, almost the personality, the character of the company as embodied in the CEO, which was you. As a chairman, I mean, I'll tell the audience, if they don't know you personally, that Passion is obvious, and any company needs to have passion. I think that's an ingredient we would all agree that is absolutely fundamental, is that every morning you wake up, even if you've had failures the day before, you're excited about the opportunities to move ahead.
Mhm.
But the other element, the one that really stood out to me personally, and the reason I got involved, is you were in the market every single day. While you had a commitment to your employees, the reality was the ultimate success was going to be in the market, whether it was looking for partners as suppliers, or whether it was looking to understand the demand of the market and the need, or ultimately where in fact you might sell. You never rested, and you were not someone who sat in the office thinking success would be realized just through internet connections, just through the telephone. That's what I referred to and over again about relational skills is even though you're bald, you're in the market every single day and you're building relationships.
Well, Perry, there's a saying that when you're a startup at a certain age, all your sales have to be founder led, especially if you're in the enterprise. If you're a big enterprise, they say your sales should be founder led because your founders out talking to customers, they're understanding product market fit, they're getting feedback, and they're reiterating the product, and they're pushing forward for success. So that to your point, that's even the weeks before we were acquired, I was still doing demos, which is like, wait, Werner, your company is 7 years old, you're doing demos? I love doing demos. I was doing the odd demo because whenever we demo to a customer, we always learn something. I always learn something new. And that little bit of knowledge just goes to the knowledge bank of, okay, can we fit this into the product? No, we don't have it in, but it could wait. Or this is some new learning we should take advantage of in our marketing lingo or our positioning lingo or how we engage with customers. You're always learning. And once you turn off that tap, once you're no longer talking to customers, you get to be an age company and you grow fast. And I think that's if you're any business, any CEO, I think to be successful, you need to be talking to customers. If you relegated or that's been delegated to your salespeople and you no longer talk to customers about your company and your product, I think your days are numbered.
Well, I think that's good. It's a good point to wrap up. Tony, I'm going to call on you now. Werner's given us a lot of color about his operational style, the relevance of being market focused, the clarity of mission. I mean, you've been in this area for some years now, as I don't think we all appreciate the word academic, but I mean, the reality is this has been your passion to better understand the entrepreneur. Why don't you share with us some of your insights and maybe some of the points that Werner made, didn't make, or shouldn't have made?
Oh, I think I have. Thanks, Perry, for having me. And I'll note my colleague Michael Lounsbury is also in the group as well. So shout out to Mike. No, very, very interesting story. I think one thing that strikes me, and I'm among the younger people in the crowd, I noticed. And so one of the nice things is Werner's kind of actually a very archetypal kind of entrepreneur when you look at entrepreneurs in high technology. They're not the Mark Zuckerbergs. They're not the the young person that drops out of college and everything like that. A recent article came out by a group, actually multi-university study, that the average age for success of founders is 45, is the sort of the time when you're most likely to be able to build a business successfully, not 21 or whatever it were, and certainly not dropped out of college. I think another thing that resonates with me, and I think Werner has a master's, but I'm not sure, is that your standard tech entrepreneur has a master's plus typically 5 years of work experience minimum, so that they can understand customer channels and some of these kinds of things. So I think that's very interesting. Those are ways that it resonates, and I think a lot of the things that Werner talks about in terms of the team and sales, where I have two questions, I think maybe three questions. I'm not sure which one to start with, so I'll just kind of lay all three of them out there as just kind of thoughts. I'll make one question two-parter, and that way I've only got two questions. So So the first is that how do we make the ecosystem better, and how do we better twine with the ecosystem? There's been a lot of excitement here in the last, let's say 2 years with Startup TNT, which I would say is, we had Startup Edmonton, which is kind of like the first real incubator that Edmonton had, in my opinion, maybe NABI. But then Startup TNT is really feeling like the first community for entrepreneurs, and it's really unleashed a lot of enthusiasm and kind of activity. And maybe a question for Werner I would have is how do you feed back your experience into the ecosystem, and what additionally could be built here? And I think another thing that we struggle with at the university, this is the second part, is the reality of entrepreneurship is that they're not like students that are undergrads that are starting companies. They're people that you want to give an entrepreneurial mindset to while they're in school, and you want to expose them to entrepreneurship and networks and things like that, so that in 5 or 10 years, when they're ready, that they're activated and can very quickly get going. So maybe I'll stop there as a first 2-part question is, how do you think about giving back to the ecosystem and then building on what's here? And then secondly, what's the role of our institutions here, and particularly the university, which is a great source in the knowledge businesses?
Sure. First off, Tony, thanks. Nice meeting you. I've not met you before, and I appreciate the accolade that I'm under 45, so I'll take that to the bank.
All right, I'm over now. Maybe I'm not the oldest youngest person. And I see Richard and Nicole just joined there. Clearly, I think on the leading side.
So you're right. If you ignore, the 2 founders of Google and the Zuckerbergs of the world, which are really sort of massive outliers in the whole scheme of things, you're right. That study said what the average age of the successful founders of startups were in the 40s. Is that what it was? Early 40s?
It's the peak likelihood.
Yeah, peak for success. And that
success.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've been there, you've done it, you've learned a few things. Absolutely. The other side is I was a first-time founder. And in the angel scheme, first-time founders are good bets, because why? They don't know enough about what they don't know. And so they're somewhat fearless, right? And that's me for my first 7 years. But to your point about feeding back, so once we were sold, the first thing I came to, and I talked to Perry, and I said, I want to give back. And so I've been giving back. So I joined Startup TNT, and Startup TNT is the most magnificent thing ever invented, where investors get together, you see 20, 30 startups, we interview them, we give them advice over a period of 5 to 6 weeks, help them shape their story back and forth, and then we go to the final pitch night. Wonderful, fun exercise, and you learn a lot. And along the way, I tried to impart what I've learned to them in sort of a neutral manner, right? Hey, this is just a thought, right? When I did this, I see this happening. You may want to pay attention to A, B, and C. And so that's part of the giving back learning that I'm doing in the ecosystem, Tony. And that's it is in a great environment, and most of the companies are very receptive to that advice. And once they understand that, okay, well, you're a founder, you exited, they take your feedback a little more seriously, and I saw that, and I want to contribute. I would be part of the group in the fall too. So that's my giving back to the community. Your second question was how institutions like the U of A could help foster the next generation of entrepreneurs, and I don't really know the answer to that question, other than having them have the experience of other successful entrepreneurs go see them, and they present to them, or they meet to them. Just having them circulate in the community with them, I think that's the number one thing. If I could speak to a group of 50 students or 100 students, there could be 2 sitting in the back of the room who've had an idea for some time and have the moxie to pull something off. You never know. But I think having people like them, like myself, circulate among them, show the success. Wow, you weren't 100 people company. We were under 10 employees. We were under 10 employees, and we got sold for a very, very nice multiple. How does that happen? Well, you don't have to have 100 people. You don't have to have 500 people. You don't have to be driving $500 million in revenues. You can be a very successful small startup, solve a key problem, and if you do it really well, you draw attention, and if you draw attention, good things will come to you.
Tony, did you have a third question there?
I do, and actually would follow up. Thanks very much, Werner. I appreciate that a lot. I think a lot of what we try to do, just to give a sense to the group here, around eHub and many of the other innovation entrepreneurship efforts that are at the university now, is these students, by engaging in it, they start to see what the network looks like. And they might not become entrepreneurs, but they're able to navigate tremendous networks. One of our MBA students is now running for the Liberal Party, having started or first working for a tech startup, then becoming the CEO, and then finding some opportunities through that. So it's just tremendously important, and I really resonates what you said with me. I think the other thing that's really tricky, and actually kind of answered it there, but you talked about the multiple, and I know you don't want to discuss anything confidential. There's no need to do that. But when I started going to school in the 2000s, people at the time were really interested in something called, going global firms. So startups that would typically start up in Northern Europe, but their initial market was the US. And I know in Canada, we don't seem to want to do anything that looks like it could be valuable to the US. We need to think about serving ourselves. And there's that sort of narrative of the Canadian, do things for Canada first. And you're a successful company in Edmonton serving a much larger market. I think there's some cost to not being in the US. Some companies have decided to move to try to get closer from that. It seems like your company has been able to do it without moving. Could you speak to some of that? Did you face disadvantages from staying? And then maybe the other side of that is how can we better help entrepreneurs, or maybe even Canadians, feel more comfortable with targeting US markets initially, or even global? US to me is like a global market. They're not necessarily that different, but I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Sure.
And then maybe other questions after that.
Yeah,
so
let me answer an
right
earlier
here.
observation. So I do have a master's degree, an MBA from the University of Saskatchewan. So I'm a Saskatchewan boy. So there you
All
go.
right.
Cool. So I don't think startups these days, unlike a hardware company, startups these days, and I know a few founders, and I've met a whole bunch, and just seeing their marketplace ideas and where they want to go. I don't think startups these days say they're only going to be focused in Canada, or how do I go to the US? I think their big focus out of the gate is I want to solve North America, or I have, North America first. And then down the road, if they're successful, how do we get to Europe? We're looking at Europe in our 6th year. We're beginning to look at Europe. So I don't think they have blockers on saying I'm just going to stay in Canada, because the beautiful thing about the internet is that there are no geographic bounds, right, Tony? You create a product, people click and buy on it. They could be sitting in Czechoslovakia, they could be sitting in Bulgaria, they could be sitting in Brazil, right? So you really don't have any control over that. You do on your messaging and your value proposition. So from my standpoint, I don't see startup software CEOs saying I want to be focused in a certain market by and large. They want to go where the customers are, and we're next door to the largest free market in the world, which is a huge blessing.
I don't think maybe I'll clarify this. I don't think the startups are thinking that about their markets. But I think the policy thinkers are thinking about how do we retain and make sure that Canadian companies are serving Canada. And it seems like, and maybe, I think you're kind of in the in the software space. I guess you're seeing it more in maybe some of the other spaces, but could you perhaps speak to Canadian policy or incentives, or do you just kind of stay away from all of that stuff?
Oh, you don't want me to go there?
Yeah,
I-
you know what? I'll frame it a different way because Perry asked for some color. I
Mhm.
spoke to a Canadian VC with Mike knows this person, but doesn't necessarily know this story. I spoke with a Canadian VC that's working out of Palo Alto,
Mhm.
who invests in Canada. And she told me literally that we won't go near companies that engage with the Canadian ecosystem.
Because
Need to grow a lot.
Yeah.
And her view was, focus on your mission. Kind of the things actually, Werner, that I think you said was build a company.
Yeah. Tony, I love that. I love what she said to you, because that when we got going, and what I tell people now is, and I heard somebody else echo this at Startup TNT, and I've followed a few angel podcasts, and the message is quickly, I don't care what award you won. It's not about winning awards. Customers don't care about you winning awards. So if you win a business case award, to me, that's, you put all that effort to that, and you should be out talking to customers. Customers care about, well, a few things. First of all, does your product meet their needs, and can you respond aptly to them? They really don't care if you won 3 awards, if you got a gold standard, if some Aztec, whatever, and I think I know what that is. They really have they don't care. And as a founder, I look at these companies going, you spend all this time chasing these awards and all this effort from your little startup when you should have been knocking on 5 doors, right? Those 5 doors will pay you more than winning a $10,000 business case thing, right? So it's the wrong, and I think this is the more immature founder who hasn't had the advice of people who've been there or done that, or who are just, they live in a different world. But I'll tell you proudly, we never won a single award in my company.
I'm going to interrupt here for a minute. I've got a question for you, Tony.
I did win the attention of a nice acquirer who loved us. So I'll tell you that much.
One of the things I think we want to highlight is what you've both alluded to is the innovation ecosystem. One of the prime ingredients is the accumulation of experience, failures and successes. You don't build an ecosystem by dumping a bunch of money in it, or even dumping a bunch of MBAs. There are so many elements in a successful soup, or the right soup. And one of them that's often overlooked is how critical it is that people like Werner and others who may have in fact failed and or succeeded are prepared to share that experience with others. Now, we've had join us a young fellow by the name of Richard Ivety and his soon-to-be bride, Nicole. And Richard, I'd like to introduce you as a young entrepreneur now, or currently, I think, shaking on the screen, but in Vancouver. Tell us a little bit about yourself as an entrepreneur, what you're learning, and why you got into wanting to run your own business instead of getting a job with the government.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to touch on that. First of all, we're on our shuttle here, getting transported from a beach to our open house for our wedding that is happening tomorrow. So traffic was a little bit dicey here, which means we're still on a bus. But
I hope there's not too much background noise. You can hear us okay?
yeah, is that coming through?
Yeah, it's coming. You're sounding fine.
Awesome.
Perfect.
You're just shaky, that's all.
Yeah, I'm holding my phone on a selfie.
It's an attention getter. It works well.
There you
He's
go.
getting married tomorrow. I would be shaking too.
Yeah, there you go. It's
Someone who's been there.
solution-seeking attitude.
That's
We'll put it
right,
that way.
yeah.
Yeah, super appreciate the invite and the opportunity, Perry. It's I think it's been a long time coming. It's amazing we've known each other for something like 12 years already in different respects. Yeah, it's been an interesting time. My family's been in entrepreneurship for decades. My dad ran his first company when he was, that was 1994, and I was working for the family business for about 17 years. Went to business school, was in some youth groups and everything. And I went to business school to be able to learn how to run business. That was kind of the whole point. But started finally finding out that to be able to learn how to run business, you have to get around successful business entrepreneurs, not necessarily professors, although there's a lot of great resources and insights to learn from anybody, I think. We have a couple of different organizations that we're running right now. And for the sake of this conversation, the hat we'll be wearing is on behalf of our company called Emerging Consultants, who currently focus on the electric vehicle charger industry, smart network vehicle charger industry. And then our relatively short mid-term vision is to branch out into other sectors of the green economy, battery, solar, and other types of consulting. Been open for business since a month before COVID, actually. February, before everything shut down, we thought we'd venture into 100% entrepreneurship, be under our own thumb and our own thumb only. What could derail us in any way, shape, or form? We found that out pretty quick, and 18 months later, we're getting married tomorrow.
Yeah, we've had to make lots of adjustments and figure things out that way. I came on board, I guess, Richard was working in the industry in a career kind of job, and realized pretty quick that that wasn't going to work for him. He just, I guess, the freedom of controlling our own time that I think really drew us to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
To be able to not be trapped in an office, to work, in the hours that make sense for us and for our schedule. Which usually is typically late at night. That's kind of how we roll. But with that, it allows us to build something for ourselves. And I think that's something I didn't realize I would find so valuable when we started doing things like this. But yeah, just to have the control that we have now over everything has been incredible. And
A question then to
we've
both.
had a lot of challenges learning to work together as a couple, for sure. I think some of the, as a future husband and wife team, fiance team, we've had to learn, where are your strengths, where are mine, where is your weaknesses, where can I fill in for you?
Yeah.
How can we fill in the gaps for each other so that we can stay in our own lanes and divide and conquer when we need to and work together as well.
Yeah.
At the same time, and we learned a lot about each other,
That's awesome.
and we've learned a lot about just running a business in general.
Yeah, one question, then I'll move on. Richard and Nicole, you've emphasized the relevance of being an entrepreneur to being your own bosses and independence. That sounds like you don't mind being lonely, and yet in order to, one's got to find networks and one needs to find resources because you're not independently wealthy, able to finance and buy whatever you're seeking. Have you found what you're looking for in order to continue to grow, or are you starving?
Well, I've certainly been eating less, but I think that's more voluntary than anything. Down 30 pounds actually, but no, I maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear the question being like, if you're venturing out on your own terms, not quite yet
You're breaking up.
totally set up in the network aspect.
Okay, Richard, you're breaking up. You're not getting through.
And okay, sorry about
Try shutting off
better?
your camera, Richard.
Sure.
Try shutting off the video.
Is that better?
Yeah, give it another shot there, Richard.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the question I heard was, is it kind of lonely at the top of your own company when it's not quite at the point where there's enough layers of it to be full of people? Well, I think if I had traditionally gone into the route of entrepreneurship, that'd probably be the case because I'd be the top of my company and Nicole would be doing whatever else she was doing, which was typically in arts and band area of things. But just based on who we've been able to get in our corner and earn access to the last handful of years, that teach people how to build as a couple. Just means that really we get to spend as much time as possible with each other rather than apart. And if I have to be lonely right next to Nicole every day, well, that's just fine by me.
Yeah, and I think that we actually started our entrepreneurial journey within a network of people, because that was what influenced us to really pursue it, was to meet a bunch of people who were entrepreneurs already and just see how they were living their lives and start to form really close relationships that it formed a support system. And though like we're doing a different kind of business than maybe they are in some respects, just the cohesion of having like
Like
an
mine.
association of people who are just fighting for that vision of building something for themselves is,
You did.
I've never really felt alone, I would say, in that.
You didn't move into an incubator or an accelerator. You stayed out as Werner did. Is there any particular reason why you didn't simply join others like-minded that were sitting or operating in an incubator someplace?
I would say we're kind of we like working on our own terms, not necessarily with our own tools or anything like that. See if I can pop back in here.
No, it's okay. I can move on from there, but
Yeah, that was a tough question to think about.
I'm getting to, I want to make a point, and that's really why I raised the question. And I'll ask Tony if he may want to jump in on this as well. Federal governments across this country have been making significant investments over the last in the development of incubators and accelerators. And I listened to Bastille recently championing the relevance of Mars in the Toronto market. The federal government is now undertaking a review, and we know that the Alberta government terminated the support for Tech Edmonton, or the University of Alberta did. There seem to be some questions being asked now about whether accelerators and incubators are achieving the objective of growing companies, helping them survive, move on. Anybody want to comment about the relevance of incubators and accelerators as we've seen them grow, and the amount of championing that seems to be going on as them being vehicles for success versus just real estate deals? Tony?
Yeah, very happy to talk on this. So we can think of generally incubators and accelerators as two different ends of a spectrum. And I'm getting some feedback. I'm not sure if it's from Richard and
Tony, or can you mute? Yeah, I think that was Tony. Okay.
Is it good? Is it working?
Go. It's okay.
Yeah, okay. So incubators are warm and nurturing and build community. And accelerators are the opposite of that. They're agentic, they're bold, they go for money and growth, and they're very, very focused on accelerating, on having the companies go very quickly. And there's no sort of pure form of either of these, but you can kind of think of them as two different ends of a spectrum, right? So the literature on incubators is quite poor. Like, it shows that companies that stay in incubators tend to die faster the instant they leave. So, you know, it's an incubator. You take the chicks out too early, then the chicks have some trouble surviving, right? So, and so we know that companies lingering in incubators for long periods of time, and that's sort of where the research is going. Accelerators are really tricky because they succeed like lottery tickets succeed, and a lot of this high growth entrepreneurship, which is they're very important and very successful for a small group of companies who have outsized returns, right?
Yep.
So they don't, I think Peter Thiel defines this very nicely as the entrepreneur's problem as being a 0 to 1. And there's a huge number of zeros, and your job is to get over to 1. And, you know, the 1 can be really big, it can be moderately big, but it's a thing. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs that have trouble. And that's the problem, is getting from that nothing to something. Accelerators are very good for a few of those ones, right? They're really good for making lottery tickets, it seems like. And so I share all this not to hear myself talk, but because it's actually really important that policymakers understand what they're buying when they invest in these things, and they don't. And so I think that's sort of like problem one. And then problem two is, it seems like we pilot everything here for 2 or 3 years and then pretend like we don't need to support it anymore. And maybe 5 years. So there's some real, I think, lack of long-term support and continuous reinforcing support over time from government. There's maybe a third thing is, you know what, I think I like Werner's advice. Well, I'm taking it as advice. I could talk about this for hours. There are so many things that are done wrong. But
Tony, just one question on the study that you're referring to, or studies on the accelerators. What was the time period of the study, and what were the geographic locations of the accelerators?
you know, this stuff's a bit old,
Okay.
like much of it. I would put this probably, I'm not sure, as working papers in 2000, I would say probably 13, 15, somewhere in
Okay.
there, which means the
Okay.
data is coming out of the 2012 period.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it matches up with anecdotal stuff too. If you
Yeah.
look at Y Combinator, which I think is probably, if for those of you who haven't heard of Y Combinator, is probably the most successful
It is, yeah.
accelerator out there.
Yeah.
Just for the record, another one's Plug and Play and another one's Techstars, if you're curious about this.
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure what, so, you know, I was surprised as a startup CEO, successfully exited, and I take part of startup TNT, see wonderful, 20 companies presented, and then we do some due diligence on them. And I'm surprised I was surprised overall by the lack of management. I don't know what I want to call that, but management aptitude and smartness, given the sheer volume of resources available today, podcasts, people in the startup community who can help you in anything and everything in your startup. And I asked one company that had several founders, and if you have several founders, a basic thing you want to have in place is a founder shareholder vesting agreement, which basically has, if you have 3 or 4 founders, everyone gets their amount, but their shares vest to them, they reverse vest over a period of 4 years. So if you have 4 founders and they get a company going and founder A decides to leave after a year, guess what? They only get a year's worth of their shares, not their full allotment. So basic understanding in creating startups with founders. And I was surprised by 2 of these companies that had several founders. They looked at me and said, well, no one's going to leave. We're all going to be here for 6 years. And I'm like, that's obscene. That
Can I just make
tells
2 quick comments?
But one thing I wanted to say was an accelerator, or call it an incubator that runs fast, it helps to educate the founders into these basic street rules, right? There's a lot of street rules that people should know, and they should go and find. That I was surprised a lot of these startups I saw did not know the street rules that I knew 7 years ago, that are pretty evident these days. So I think that education, every company that I saw in startup TNT could have benefited by knowing, having gone through some basis about being educated about how to create a company, how to do a pitch, how to do A, B, and C, how to make yourself more investable. There's some basic understanding that they did not know that I think an accelerator or a smart incubator would bring to them.
When we get into
I'll jump in there.
when we get into a discussion of an innovation ecosystem, accelerators, incubators, education, we're making an assumption that entrepreneurs can be made. They can be grown, they can be shaped, they can be cultivated. There's another view that they can't be, that they're born. Whatever takes place at the conception or with the shaping of their DNA or in their very early years is critical. And from that point on, you might be able to tweak them a little bit, but there's not much in terms of nurturing. Either one of you want to weigh in on the discussion about whether or not entrepreneurs are made or born?
Sure.
They're made. The discussion is over, Perry.
That was
There's
short. That sounds like the climate change debate, but go ahead.
oh no, we're all made. We're all products of our environment. I mean, the quick comment I wanted to say to Werner, actually, let me put it this a simple way. We did a study at the University of Alberta. 20% of people at the University of Alberta have founded some sort of organization over their careers. As you look at the alumni base, it's not like there's only 5 kinds of people and 1/5 is, and they're all over the type. There are archetypes of entrepreneurs, and we talk. Mike and I just had conversations last week, and maybe even more recently, about hero stories and these kinds of things. And the narratives are of a particular type. The entrepreneur has a big hero narrative, but Werner talked about team. It's a very different kind of narrative. But I'll wrap up just a couple of quick things. This reverse vesting, just on the made side, reverse vesting, that's how Silicon Valley does it. And it's not how the oil and gas companies have done it. And if we look around our ecosystem, nobody knows how to do this stuff, because for most business people in this ecosystem, that's not how they've done business over the last many decades. And so that's something that's a made kind of story.
I'll pop in there.
I'll just say one other quick thing, and then I think this will be a nice setup, but I don't know. There are loads of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley that have no idea what the hell they're doing, like even more than here. It's just that there's sorting mechanisms for that, right?
Right.
So 40 people get into Y Combinator. That's, I don't know how many, 800 people or 800 companies that don't, right? So they're taking the cream of the crop all the time. And then most of those don't go very far. Sorry, off to Richard to tell us about what he's learned.
No problem. Appreciate that. I think you're all circling around.
Shut off your video, Richard, so we can hear you.
All right. Sure. Is that better?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, I would say you're all kind of circling around the same point, and it's a very powerful one in my experience. I've learned to call that the difference between the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. A fixed mindset, as you've been saying, is simply the thought process is that we're all born as whoever we're going to be, and other than a few standard deviations left or right, that's kind of where you're going to end up. Growth mindset is more of a 1% better a day kind of principle, where your best today can still be topped by your best tomorrow. And so if that's the case, you get 1% better a day, and by the end of it all, you get, compounded growth at least 365% better on that year. Compound that over year by year, kind of go wherever you want. And like I went to school for business, takes 6 years, get a really fancy receipt, and that didn't teach me how to run business, let alone the business that gave the results that I was looking for out of being my own entrepreneurial minded person, which was more than anything control over time. Money's fine, but if all you have is money, you can't spend it on your time, well, then rather have time, to be honest. And the kind of principles that allow people to really build something that breaks them free and gets that time and money combination, it's not talked about in schools, for sure, none that I've been to. To be able to, as you were saying, get into incubators that kind of accelerate that and give you the ground rules and the foundation to be able to move forward in whatever respect you need is a great tool. But are the people who are teaching that really imparting the exact kind of lifestyle that you'd like to create for yourself as well? It's one thing to pass on knowledge, but as the person who's receiving that knowledge as well, it's important to know what your end goal is. And if that aligns with the person who's teaching, then great. If it doesn't, for me anyway, I gotta question exactly who I'm going to allow to speak into my life to be able to help create results that I want. And that's been super powerful for us.
I'm going to shift gears once again. There are people out there who are also serial engineers, serial entrepreneurs that may have a perspective that there are some keys to success that we haven't talked about. And I'm going to ask Bud Norris if Bud wants to weigh in here. Bud has been an entrepreneur through most of his life, incredibly successful, built pillars to post, et cetera, and hasn't let up. So, Bud, what do you think are some of the characteristics of the entrepreneur himself? I'm not talking about operational principles, but what is it that makes an entrepreneur successful from your perspective?
I guess the first thing is recognizing that, and this is my own personal joyride, is where is the opportunity? Because from my point of view, if you can run one business, you can run just about any business. All you need to do is hire the right technical people. Werner, incredibly successful, and congratulations. You and I have known each other for a few years, and I've watched, sometimes unknown to you. Hard to argue with virtually any of the points that Werner put forward. I would offer an alternative to frugality. And although I've never been known as a spendthrift in any of my businesses, which number over 20 across probably 15 different industries, from pizza places to engineering firm, one of my leadership roles has always been to look for the next vision and to make sure that the resources were available to the folks, to the team that I had around me, so that they could go and do their jobs and I could stop working. And I had a couple of mentors when I was very young, 22, 23 years old. They didn't know each other, but they both came to me with the same message. But if you want to be successful and accomplish whatever it is your goals are, not to predefine them on you, you need to stop working. Because as long as you're working for a living, you're probably not doing what you really, really want to do, okay? And although I look around the Zoom here, I would say that a lot of people have been able to reach the stage where they are happy with the job that they have. I haven't had a specific job for probably close to 40 years, but I've also had 20 different businesses, and I've been surrounded by people who, like Werner, we and my partners have been able to coalesce them into a team that moved us forward to great success, similar to Werner's. I guess one of the philosophical areas that I resent is probably a better word, is the intrusion of government policymakers, both political and bureaucratic, into my world of entrepreneurism. Many people have become professional grant writers, professional program creators, and haven't added, in many cases that I know of, virtually any value to the startups, to the people that are looking for how do I make this work, and that has been a shame. I'm proud to say I've never applied for, and therefore I never received $1 in government grants.
Here, Bud. Here.
So, having said that, the original way of starting a business, any business, was family, friends, and fools, right? That's what most of us did with gray hair, and then coupling that with organic growth and being able to have good financial information, good financial resources available through personal commitment, families, and fools and friends. And now it seems to me that by far and away, most organizations are able to feed themselves with government money, and hair on them. I guess if that's the system, take advantage of the system. It's no different than healthcare. Do we all need everything that we're entitled to? But as an old-fashioned semi-retired entrepreneur, I resent the platters that are laid out. And if you can just touch the right buttons to the right bureaucrat, you'll get a phone call that says, "Oh, by the way, do you need more money?" because it's their job to give away money. It's not their job to look for quality. It's not their job to set up key performance factors so that there's a monitoring of, is this really a good investment for the government people or for government money? So there's a lot of old-fashioned ideas that I carry forward. I still am a little bit active in I do a lot of coaching and mentoring, and I still shy away when people say, well, maybe we could apply for a government grant. And I say, well, maybe you can, but not with me. So anyway, sorry, folks, but I guess a little digression there.
Well, it's not a digression, but you have missed a point that I would like to hear your views on, and that is one can be a softy, a nice guy, and make sure that everybody feels good. And it becomes a feel-good environment. We define the culture as we're all getting along, things are happy. And the other one is either in a crisis or where you've got one hell of a hurdle to climb, the tough love model. Have you had any success in either one of them? I know you're one hell of a son of a bitch, but can you give me any color as to which model fits best under what circumstances?
I saved all up the toughness, bitchiness for you, Perry. No, actually, I'm a pretty soft heart. We were an initiator of an ESOP company over 25 years ago, before ESOP was even common language. And from day one, our company was set up that way. And when we sold, we had 68 shareholders, right from secretaries up to the founding partners and myself included. Unlike a lot of consulting firms, especially accountants and lawyers and engineers, where you work your way up the partnership ladder, you can be an associate, and then you're a part-time associate, and then you're a full-time associate, and then you're etc. And finally, after 25 years, you get to be a real partner. And all of our shareholders held voting shares, exactly the same shares as we held. And they ended up, and we never gave away a single share. Every share was purchased based on a real valuation by real evaluators, accountants, and so those people ended up at our sale owning roughly 20% of our organization, 68 people. So I don't think that comes from the heart of a bitch. Okay, do you have to sometimes make hard decisions? Of course you do. And at one point, you know, we had a layoff in our engineering firm, and there were a number of people that had to go, including some partners, including some shareholders. So I think I'm very open to structure, and I certainly have no need to be in control. So
Thanks, Bud. I'm going to open it up now for any general commentary or questions. Tom, you got your hand up, so unmute and let's hear your comment or your question. Unmute, Tom.
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, I've been an entrepreneur for 15 odd years or more, and I produced for a long time. I was in the TV game and produced documentaries primarily. And then I could see, I did this documentary for the National Film Board, and this producer I was working with, he said, Tom, at the end of this, you're going to make 5 cents an hour. And I said, come on. I said, I've got everything so organized. I've got this really defined. It was on a documentary on the lifestyle of long distance truckers, and went all over North America following these truckers. And at the end of it, I think I didn't make 5 cents an hour. I made less than that. But it comes down to the psyche of the entrepreneur and the freelance filmmaker and all of these people who want to take a risk. And you meet these people and they say, oh, you've done so much, you've been so many places. I've been down to coal mines and so on all over the place. But the end result is that you have at least tried. You know, my recent business went down with the COVID-19, but at the end of it all, I can look back and say, wow, you know, I've really had a really interesting life. And I was sitting with the head of the National Film Board one day at coffee, and I was complaining, you know, like, how do you make a living at these things, you know, filmmaking or business, small business. I've been doing apps for the last 15 years, 10 years, 12 years. And how do you make a living at it? How do you actually hit the big success money thing? And he says, he looks up at the window near me and he points up and he says, Tom, you could be sitting behind one of those desks up there in that steel building there for most of your life. Would you like that? He says, you know, so that sort of summed up my views about entrepreneurship. And the other thing is you got to have guts. You really have to have nerve. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's not for the weak-willed or the coward. It's a really, really tough grind. That's why 80% of them fail. So here we go.
Excellent point. I mean, I think you've underscored the relevance of resilience, and maybe that's why age 45 is a key, is a touch point.
Yeah.
That one's got to have a little bit of life experience to know when to get afraid and when fear is really a driver for change.
But it destroys partnerships too, Perry. You know, like relationships break down when you can't make the cash flow, right? And you're paying your staff first, and you're left with nothing for a couple of months, and then.
Well, I'll tell you, as an investor, one of the principles that I learned early on is that if you're dealing with a naive client, and that is an early stage startup, young person perhaps, the first thing that they often turn to is become interpersonal when they're facing a problem, instead of looking at, look, we've got a mission. This baby must be kept alive. This is not about us as individuals, but about why we have come together to grow something.
Yeah.
And they often get lost in becoming interpersonal and pointing fingers at one another instead of appreciating that they are there together to grow something. It's like marriage, Richard. Ilona, anything you want to add to the discussion today? Unmute if you would. Okay, she's unmute.
Unmute.
What I
Gotcha.
found in this discussion was I've been following all sides of it, and there seems to be a dichotomy. On one hand, there is this support for the government agencies, and I know from having talked with many of you and listened to you over the last few weeks, is that lots of you have profited from the government agencies like Alberta Innovates and IRAP and whatever. Werner, you haven't, and a couple of the others haven't, but many of you have. And I work for Research Money, which works at the intersection of policy, investment, and innovation. And one of the things we're trying to do is to look at what needs to be improved. So I got a couple of really good op-eds, one from Perry and one from Randall on, you know, new innovation models. And I am looking for op-eds, maybe from Tony or some of you or Werner, on what needs to happen in terms of making the innovation ecosystem better. Because I will tell you that Alberta Innovates this year celebrated its 100th anniversary. And I don't know how many of you are in Alberta, but Alberta Innovates has helped an awful lot of people, right? So I just want to throw that out there. And Ling, you have benefited, and so have several other people, right?
Yes, so I have been supported by Alberta Innovates and IRAP for multiple times in the past. My experience is, the money they pay me is for me actually learning what what needs to be. I mean, so I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, but really, I think in the last few years, I'm a true entrepreneur. Before I'm just a consulting. So I totally agree with the first gentleman talk about, mission, focus on one thing. The best thing I did is try to save my son, not about serving my client. By focus on saving my son, I win so many government contracts, grants, not grants, service delivery contracts. I just win 3-year licensing deal to support our software on national scale rollout. That's a, revenue, right? That's not a grant, that's a revenue. People are recognizing what we're doing. And I have an inquiry now all over the world. People are want exactly the same thing. They want a model we have developed to deploy there to serving local community. I didn't do that for a reason to make money. I did the reason purely because I saw a need. I saw nobody is trying to solve that problem. I devote myself to solve that problem. And that's what I told people.
But I think that you've addressed the problem. A real sort of key point of entrepreneurs is that they do it partly for the money, but partly because they are driven by some other passion. And I would speak to any one of you entrepreneurs. Yes, the money is part of it, but there's something bigger.
No,
all right.
if you go
And
after money, you're never going to make
you
money.
will never, yeah, you got to do something bigger. So
Ilona, one of the questions that we ask when we do that economic resilience survey twice a year is the question of the role of government. And the role of government can be multiple. It can be involved in tax credits as an incentive.
Yep.
It can be involved in direct financing of long-term research. It can be involved in bridging loans for organizations that are trying to get into a startup mode. I mean, there are multiple roles. And I think one of the questions that are being asked right now is if we're having problems expediting innovation in Canada, and we are on an international scale, what can we do differently? And it's an important question to be asking right now, and to get adequate input from academia is one thing, and research of what's going on in the world that is fitting for the Canadian environment. And it's another thing to draw on the experience of people like Werner and Ling and others who have been in the market, who have the scars to show. Because whatever we're going to do, it's got to be situational to fit Canada. And Canada, from West Coast to East Coast, is not homogeneous in terms of what is required in Vancouver may not be what's required in Montreal. So the models are not likely to be single program structures, but to be shaped in order to fit the maturity of the market that we're looking at. Calgary right now is on a roll and very excited, because many of the oil and gas executives, when laid off, got involved in shaping early stage startups and pooling of capital. Edmonton was buffered. Public sector had not had that hit. And maybe public sector is not a bastion of entrepreneurs in any case, but regardless, Edmonton and Calgary are going to need different solutions. At least that's in my opinion. And that comes back to something I think Tony has alluded to. Michael, you've been with us from the startup. If you're still there, or any concluding comments you want to make, or is there anyone with us? Sharon, you arrived late, but regardless, any concluding comments or observations you want to make? Raise your hand if someone has a concluding comment or a question. Okay, Barry, I'll call on Barry then. Barry, you go, and then I'll call on you next, Peter.
Okay, just a quick background for those of you that don't know. I spent about half my career in public service in industry development, and then the other in the private sector, and really not a lot of focus in Canada. I think people would say I've had, at least say I've had 90% of my career, it's been a success. There is one Alberta example that we should probably look at that was an entrepreneur before I think the word was even put on the street very seriously, and that was in the early 80s, a graduating from U of A, decided to go into the international development business. And it was called AgriTeam. I think they changed their name in the last year. 200 or plus employees, up to 43 different countries they do business in. I don't think they ever issued, they paid invoices into the US, or I'm sorry, they received payments from the US, from US programs. I don't think they ever sold a penny of anything into the US. And we haven't even talked about that kind of development. It's happened because 2 or maybe 3, and not 2 or 3 people got together in the early 80s and decided this was an area where we could do business internationally. They have offices in Calgary on the south end of town. They own a building, a business building, and they have a big office in Ottawa, but they've had offices in Manila and around the world. And they've had a major impact on the rapid developments that you've seen in China through the work they've done there. And I'm struggling with the discussion today because that success story is, maybe because I know it so well, but that success story is ignored. And I don't hear anybody talking about, Ling, maybe you're the closest, of trying to emulate some of their knowledge and procedure. And yes, they played government with government inputs, and they paid huge amounts of, they've been paid huge amounts of money by other governments than Canadian, but they haven't done business in Canada and they haven't wanted to do business in Canada.
Okay, well, thank you, Barry.
Okay.
I mean, that really adds an additional color to the discussion. I'm going to ask Peter, and then I'm going to wrap it up. We started about 5 minutes late, so I'm running a little bit 5 minutes over 4:35. Go ahead, Peter.
All right, well, it might be a hornet's nest, so you might want to just shut me down, but my question is around how government departments and bureaucrats or bureaucracies can be assigned taxpayer dollars and then pick winners and losers, and just really what their success rate is for doing that sort of thing versus a taxation base and everybody go in and kind of fend for themselves. So it's kind of my idea is, I can't understand how bureaucracies can be put in that position to pick winners and losers, and how successful is that?
Well, Peter, depends on how you look at it. In fact, right now, you have to compete for everything right now. So it's not like the government just hands the grant or money onto plate for you. Every time it's IFP, IFI, you have to compete. And you win some, you lose some, just like every other business. You have to compete for everything. So not like a few years ago, they will call you for, oh, I got more money. It's not a case anymore. You pretty much have to compete for anything and everything now these days.
I think we've come a long way from the politic of not picking winners and losers. The reality is, if this country is going to make it, it's going to become more of an innovator, then we have a regulator of the market called government that can play the role. But simply saying it's not going to pick winners and losers is not true. And it has been picking winners and losers every time it releases a procurement contract. So the reality is, picking winners and losers, we've got to just get better at how do you pick those that are going to make it and those that aren't? And how do you get out early when it's clearly failing, which was a point Tony made earlier, is it requires some sophistication and some education. I've alluded to the fact some research that comes out of Italy some years ago about the transition of oil and gas economies, where nations have made a commitment to make that transition. Virtually all of them have failed, but the one thing they have learned is in order to make headway, you need a sophisticated, mature public sector. And that takes you away from, quote, the naive bureaucrat, and says we can do better if in fact you have public service employees in public service that maybe have come out of Tony's programs and Michael's, that understand what entrepreneurship and the challenges of early stage startups, and that if there is no simple formula, you almost have to individualize the approaches that you're going to take, which is what mentors are. So when I talk about the formula being a soup of money, marketing, management, manpower, mergers, marriages, and metrics, I'm talking about the array of things that no single program can offer as a product, but may offer as a process. And I'm going to leave it at that. So I thank everyone. Greg, I look forward to you and I getting involved and maybe shaping something around the innovation ecosystem for the fall. Claire, thanks for helping. Tony, very much appreciate what you've offered today. And I want to thank someone who hasn't been with us today, and that's Deborah Gregg. Deborah has shaped a 12-minute video that I will be sending out shortly to all of you and to the network in general, that we'll be sharing with you and with the network her views of what she's been sharing as a consultant to early stage startups. So I want to thank Deborah Gregg from Transforma for what she has to offer that we didn't listen to today, but will be made available to each of you. So again, thank